tried to what do you call use certain AI tools, and we kind of put into it around 10 PYQs, 10-year PYQs questions, and we asked it to predict some topics. Of course, we also have used a lot of human intervention. There is a lot of human intervention behind it. Our content developers made a lot of effort. What it tried to do is it tried to identify repeated patterns or repeated themes, and we also have identified that there are certain listed themes which has the possibility of appearing in today in this year examination. So let us try to identify those topics. So you still have 3 to 4 days of preparation. If you have not yet read these topics, if you have already read these topics in sufficient depth, perfectly fine. But by any chance, if you have not read these topics in sufficient depth, still quickly go through the topic. What I have done is we are posting this question paper and also the model answer of both both these tests and the test discussion in our AKS IAS official Telegram group. So you can download from there and you can go through the model answers and the questions. But this session should help you identify ideally in identifying those topics, those probable topics which should help you to what do you call to prioritize on the most important things to be read in the coming days. Okay, yeah. So pay proper attention to it, because a lot of effort went into the identification of the topic itself of framing the question. Okay, so let's get into it. And just to add one more thing before I get into the original class, even the current affairs have been picked with a lot of effort. Every single topic, specifically the current affairs topic, they are identified and they follow a certain pattern and they follow a certain theme. Okay, yes. So the first question in this, if you are not having question paper with you also, don't worry about it, because like I'll just read out the essence of it. This question, what we try to do, we try to frame it on constitution, technology and governance interface. So I'm hoping one question on this. Till now, enough number of questions UPSC asked related to constitution. But these aspects, constitutionality and digital rights, constitutionality, digital rights, and constitutionality, digital governance, constitutionality, digital governance. Let's say, as a citizens, we all have some rights, isn't it? The fundamental rights, and of course, we also have certain human rights. Okay, so this particular question was framed keeping in mind this aspect that is there any constitutional backing to the rights? Is there any constitutional backing to those rights? It could be the fundamental rights and how they are supporting some of our digital rights as individuals, and how the existing rights, digital rights, are a continuation of the already existing human rights. That is one theme. And also we all know that government is doing a lot of digital interventions, isn't it? It could be Aadhaar, or it could be the recent special intense revisions of the electoral rolls. All these are the digital governance measures. But any action of the government should have the constitutionality. Any action of the government should have a constitutionality or should have a constitutional backing, isn't it? So try to identify such topics and also try to identify the constitutional basis, both of the digital rights which the citizens enjoy and the digital constitutional backing of the digital interventions which government is taking. Okay, so that is what is the essence of this topic. I'm not getting into the question proper and test discussion proper because there could be other areas also in this or related to this which you have to focus upon. But reading the model answer I am giving for this particular topic will help you to identify this area in totality. Okay, then another question, another topic, there is a possibility of question being asked this year, which I expect students to be prepared little more thoroughly. Last year also there are questions, but this year we are expecting more questions because after this new laws, BNS or BNSS, when compared to the last year, now we have identified or we have more newspaper articles wherein you find this lack of clarity in application of IPC versus BNS, and for that matter Evidence Act versus BNSS, like that. So the point I am trying to suggest, because there are plenty of newspaper articles on this topic, so they might probably want to test your knowledge. Let's say here the question we framed, if we observe carefully, I'll just take 1 minute time to read this question. A case of criminal intimidation was registered on June 25, 2024 under the Indian Penal Code. Investigation continued after July 1, 2024, when the new criminal laws came into power. During trial, the prosecution argued that a newly introduced punishment provision under the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita 2023 should apply to the accused. In this context, which of the following is the most legally appropriate position is the question we framed. Actually, the answer is investigation and procedural matters after July 1, 2024 may follow BNSS, but criminal liability and punishment will continue under IPC only, because Article 21 of Indian Constitution, Article 21 of the Indian Constitution strictly prohibits ex post facto punishment. Ex post facto punishment. Okay, if somebody is watching this session live, what you can do is you can just go to AKS IAS official Telegram channel, and we have already put the question paper there. So your ability to follow this session will be much better. Okay, so it's not just about the themes which are important for the examination. You also can actually see the questions in directly, so you will understand in much more specificity our idea behind framing this question. Then the next topic, this also is an emerging trend in UPSC. If you observe, there is one PYQ in 24 examination in this logic. It is like this. UPSC is asking question. Let's say there are schemes which government launches. Most often these are welfare driven schemes. Some of the schemes are also about strengthening rights. Schemes are also about strengthening rights. Some of the schemes have welfare focus, and some of the schemes are in the nature of consolidating the social security. Okay, but ideas like welfare or rights or social security, all these things do have a constitutional basis. Okay, they should always have a constitutional basis. Simply put, they should have a constitutional justification. I might be sounding slightly theoretical, but the moment I say an example, you will understand it. Let's say a dedicated Right to Food Act is passed, and it's passed as a law to address the problem of food security or food insecurity in the country, isn't it? So likewise, but we can always trace back things like right to food to again Article 21, likewise. So for every important intervention made by the government, we can always find or we can always identify the constitutional justifications, constitutional justification. It could be interventions, for ensuring social security to the laborers or unorganized sector workers, or they could be in the nature of the pensions, scholarships, unemployment allowances, whatever. The point I am trying to say is, all these initiatives have some kind of constitutional justification or some type of constitutional backing. which could be supported either by the preamble, principles of preamble, or it could be supported by fundamental rights, or sometimes it also could be directives or directive principles of state policy, right? So that is the intent with which this question is framed. See, including an economic policy like goods and services tax also has a constitutional justification. It's not always schemes like VBG, Ramji, or something like that, abolition of wealth tax. Everything has a constitutional justification, isn't it? Otherwise the validity of the scheme itself can be taken off, right? So that's the idea. Then one thing which is very much in the news, and I would want you guys to prepare in little more depth and detail, is about speaker, isn't it? I'm sure if you are following newspapers, plenty of controversies came on this office, and in this context, if you have read newspaper articles carefully, many of the newspaper articles also came up with suggestions or recommendations. So if you have not read this topic, please do read it. And simply put, they suggested some reforms in the constitutional office, in the office of speaker. The point I am trying to highlight is, there are also many articles which try to say that there are some constitutional limitations. Only when we address certain constitutional limitations, it is possible to implement these reforms, or in other words, we need to make some constitutional amendments. We have to make some constitutional amendments to further strengthen the office of speaker, so that it emerges as a real, in a real sense, it appears, not just appears, it actually functions as a more neutral or impartial or bipartisan agency. Okay, so try to update yourself and upgrade your knowledge on all areas surrounding the idea of speaker. I also have given one good question on this topic, especially there are certain constitutional amendments themselves which are proposed, especially to strengthen the office of the Speaker of Lok Sabha. Based on that, we framed an analytical question. Try to go through that. That also can give you a lot of information on this topic of speaker. Okay, this will take me to this question. This is one I really don't know, UPSC's all-time favorite area. So if you have not read it, quickly revise it again. Though not many references have come up in the recent times again on this particular topic, but quickly revise these topics. National emergency, okay, and financial emergency, national emergency, financial emergency, state rule, and especially governor's rule or president's rule. Here what I am trying to suggest, this time, because they have asked a question on this topic on, on different counts, they may even ask you this particular time the questions on the case laws. Case laws trend has slowly started. I believe they are going to take it one notch higher. If you carefully observe, every time certain pattern appears in mains paper, there is a tendency for UPSC to repeat or bring that pattern into prelims. Students complain, suddenly in this year mains paper we are seeing many questions that is expecting us to learn case laws. Immediately the same pattern gets reflected in the prelims paper. So this time what I am thinking, apart from the regular things you read about national emergency, financial emergency, president's rule, or misuse of article 356 likewise, this time don't think that it's mains level content. It's highly likely that the case laws which are related to, especially which are related to restriction of these emergency provisions. If you have not read it, please make some time and try to read this restriction of the emergency provisions. Okay, so this is one possible area which I do not want you guys to neglect. Then another area, please, this I'm sure some of you would have observed in the newspapers. This is something which is in the newspaper, but probably we also have to learn to connect the same to the current affairs topic. This is, we all know that in Jammu and Kashmir, after repealing of Article 370, we have come up with a new constitutional arrangement. And these things, especially after the new constitutional arrangement, there are many claims and counterclaims in the newspaper suggesting that developmental activities accelerated. When I'm saying developmental activities, not just infrastructural activities, but the real employment generation activities have enhanced in J&K. But there are also counter arguments saying that law and order conditions got degraded. Law and order got degraded. So what we try to do is we try to frame a question comparing the arrangement, the constitutional arrangement, existing constitutional arrangement in Jammu and Kashmir with constitutional arrangement of Pondicherry or Puducherry, constitutional arrangement of Puducherry. Okay, so just to enhance your knowledge further on this so-called administrative framework which is made as part of the constitutional arrangement in Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act 2019. Okay, so prepare on that topic also, there is a possibility. Then again, another thing which has repeatedly come in the newspapers, wherein they can use this dynamic concept and trace you back to the static Lakshmikant subject is, discussions on transgender persons, especially affirmative action. Okay, affirmative action for transgender persons. Okay, affirmative action in the sense both in educational institutions and also in the employment. See, constitution can extend, affirmative action is nothing but reservations, right? Constitution can extend reservations to transgender persons both in education and also in employment opportunities using the same existing constitutional articles. It need not do any amendments. Okay, there are some people who question the constitutional possibility of giving them affirmative action policies, but there is nothing that stops in more effectively implementing and including transgender persons into the state affirmative action policies. So that is one idea around which we have framed a question that also could possibly be an important area. So quickly revise that particular area also before you go to exam. Then we also framed another question. This again is inspired from a couple of mains questions, but it is written in almost all the textbooks. It's not a difficult topic. So quickly revise this basic structure doctrine. What is the case law? That's a landmark case law with regards to basic structure doctrine, and also another doctrines which you regularly read in your static books, like doctrine of pith and substance. All these are in news in the recent times, especially doctrine of pith and substance. Doctrine of colorable legislation is not specifically in the news, but doctrine of pith and substance is definitely in the news. Doctrine of colorable legislation. So read about it before you go to exam. Read about doctrine of pith and substance, and also read about doctrine of eclipse. Doctrine of eclipse. This also has come up in the newspapers more frequently in the recent times, because there is a call for including of this sunset clause or sunset provision in most of the Indian laws. So the laws would become more dynamic. Laws would become more dynamic, and laws would become more relevant to the social and economic needs. More relevant to the social and economic needs. As I already mentioned, I'm not getting into the subject proper, but I want you guys to read these topics before you go to exam once. Doctrine of eclipse, doctrine of Pithan, especially doctrine of eclipse, try to upgrade your knowledge on that. And also read once again this doctrine of pith and substance, because there are some newspaper articles suggesting that particular idea. Okay, then yes, this topic, please do not ignore reading this topic before you go to exam, because this appeared many a times in the newspaper, and the problem is our regular textbooks does not write this topic in depth and detail. We framed a question and also a model answer on this topic. You also try to upgrade your knowledge on this topic, especially related to contempt of court, and especially the constitutionality behind it. Constitutionality behind this power. See, contempt of court, it's an instrument in the hands of judiciary, right? Contempt of court is an instrument in the hands of judiciary. Ideally, this instrument which is in the hands of judiciary, it must be using it sparingly. It must be using it sparingly. Only, when it has impact on things like, separation of power, or it has direct impact on things like, independence of judiciary. These are broader principles, right? Independence of judiciary, which has the potential to hurt separation of powers, or anything which has directly attacks the dignity of the courts. But the problem is, a misuse of the contempt of court power. So there are good many articles in the newspapers questioning the constitutionality behind its power. So we try to frame a question and try to teach you that this is an exceptional constitutional, there is constitutional provision, but this is a special exemption that is provided. Okay, it's as part of Article 21. So read the model answer about it, and I also suggest you to read a little more depth about this particular topic, constitutionality behind the contempt of court, before you go to exam, as there is a possibility of this question to appear in the Okay, then this question is again framed because again tracing back to current affairs only, but a static question, and this static question is tracing back to current affairs, fundamental rights and jurisdiction of the courts. Fundamental rights and jurisdiction of the courts. Okay. So the question is something which is related to, whether it is, whether an individual should go to High Court, or an individual should go to a Supreme Court, High Court or a Supreme Court, or even lower courts can entertain questions related to usurping of fundamental rights. So the question is related to this, and it's also very much in the newspapers, very much in the current affairs. So I would suggest you guys to go in little more depth and detail. If you have already attempted this paper, you would have understood the intent behind this question. But yes, I would suggest you to read on this topic in more depth and detail. Okay. So this again is a static question which has its basis in the current affairs. This is something related to UPSC, executive, UPSC, executive, and parliamentary accountability. UPSC, executive, and parliamentary accountability. So we all know that UPSC is a constitutional body, but though it's a constitutional body, this is recently in the news, though it's a constitutional body, but it is largely an advisory role. It plays largely an advisory role. Though it plays an advisory role, for any reason, if executive is not in a position to implement the advices given by UPSC, what executive should do is annually executive, it should submit a memorandum in the parliament, citing the reasons for why it is not able to accept the advice given by UPSC. So this is the idea on which we have framed a question. So as I mentioned, this topic is mentioned in the current affairs. Try to go through this topic and read this topic. They might frame a question with little more depth also on this topic, but I would want you guys to get updated on this topic before you go for examination. Then some questions, they are not as such specifically in the current affairs, but every year we know that they are asking questions on one parliamentary standing committee. So quickly revise those topic, parliamentary standing committees. Especially their powers. They can ask questions on their powers and also questions on their limitations. So I would suggest you to revise these topics: parliamentary standing committees, powers of the parliamentary standing committees, and also their limitations. This is one area I would suggest you guys not skip. And this time, not very recently, but yes, appointment of COG also is in news. Appointment of COG is in news. So there is a possibility of question on this, whether appointment of COG, is it specifically mentioned in the constitution or not, especially with regards to duration. So that is one area which is in the news. So I would suggest you to go in little more depth and detail and read about if there is any specific constitutional provision that determines the duration of, duration of COG, the duration of office of the COG. These kind of things are in the news. So I have also framed a question on that topic. You read from the model answers, but I also would suggest you to go in little more depth on this particular topic. Okay, so these two topics can probably appear in the examination, so please be mindful of that. Okay, then also we have framed a question on Council of Ministers, and especially powers, comparison of powers between Council of Ministers and Legislative Council. This is a regular static question. If you have not read it, just quickly update yourself on this particular topic, comparing the powers of the Legislative Councils and Legislative Assemblies. Okay, and yeah. Again, another static question we try to frame on this, especially qualifications of judges, Supreme Court judges, and especially other aspects like the age of their retirement, these kind of things. It's a regular static question, so I'm not getting into it, but if you have not read about it, there is a possibility, because always, very recently also, there is an increase in the numbers of Supreme Court judges, and very frequently we read in the newspapers the delay of the trials because of paucity of numbers of the judges in the court. Likewise, so prepared on that topic also. So after that, one favorite area of UPSC they keep repeatedly asking because they know it is slightly confusing, is this topic of absolute humidity, relative humidity. Okay, and this topic appeared repeatedly in the newspapers. One because of heat waves, and also because of increasing heat strokes. So many times this topic appeared in the newspaper. This terminology is like absolute humidity, relative humidity. So what we try to do is we also try to combine two more concepts like dew point, wet bulb temperature. These are the regular concepts which are mentioned in your NCERT. So quickly revise them. Because these days sudden phenomenon like hailstorms and another not so conventional meteorological phenomenon have become a commonplace of events. There might be questions on these topics, but this is UPSC's favorite topic, absolute humidity, relative humidity. They always will try to find some contemporary thing and link it back and try to frame questions on this topic, absolute humidity and relative humidity. So another possible question, this time there is a possibility of this question to be asked because this topic was skipped in the last 2 years. So they might again ask this question on types of precipitation. Okay, we are hoping that this question might appear this year, especially types of precipitation is one question we are hoping. Like you all must have read this, frontal precipitation, when two frontal masses converge, it leads to type of precipitation, right? Then orographic precipitation you must have heard, that ascent or elevation given by sudden land masses like mountains, and that causes orographic precipitation. You all know convectional precipitation, cyclonic precipitation. So go well prepared for this, what type of uplift and different types of precipitation. Okay, especially the types of uplift and types of precipitation is a potential question. And yeah, cyclonic, frontal and orographic and convectional precipitation is one possible question. Okay, then yeah, this again, last year this question did not appear, but this time there is a possibility this question might appear again. This is a question related to ocean currents. Ocean currents is a favorite theme of UPSC because NCERT writes in so much depth about this particular topics. Okay, so read about ocean currents once again. This is a highly predicted topic this year, and also update yourself with concepts related to ocean currents like thermocline and other concepts like thermohaline, and especially their role in distribution of global heat. Likewise, reason being, because of phenomenon like repeatedly we are reading in the newspaper, El Nino event, La Nina event, these kind of things are regularly appearing in the newspaper. So they may not directly ask us the questions on this. They may slightly go into a little more depth and may connect these, to what you call ocean currents, and another concept related to ocean current is the possible topic. What we asked is a simple question like ocean currents and how they are contributing to the economic activity, and their contribution to the economic activity, especially the places where upwelling happens and nutrient redistribution happens. We framed a question on that lines, which is an easier one, but expect a slightly deeper question on ocean currents and especially their role in influencing meteorological phenomenon all over the world. Okay, yeah. Then yeah, a similar question also we have framed just to because we thought ocean currents could be a possible topic this time, so we have framed a question on the facts, especially the Gulf Stream, Labrador current, Benguela current, Brazil current. So quickly revise those topics. Okay, so whenever you are revising these topics on the currents, one common mistake students commit is direction of current they often miss. Okay, so carefully identify if these currents are northward or southward movement. So these are the some kind of silly mistakes students do. So clearly identify their direction, clearly identify their coastline. Okay, east coast or west coast, isn't it? That usually determines their, the outcomes. So precisely identify the coastlines, precisely identify the directions, and also be very clear about their, their impact on the sea surface temperatures, whether they are cold currents or warm currents, likewise. Okay. So be specific on these aspects, and especially their influence on meteorological phenomenon. Influence on meteorological phenomenon often students do not mark incorrect, but these are the two areas usually students might go wrong. So just prepare adequately on the topic of currents. Okay, then another similar question which has the possibility of appearing, we framed on deserts. Okay, especially hot deserts, cold deserts, and like Atacama desert. So because these are in the news in the recent times, but again that's a static question, also more of a static question. Then we framed another static question on vegetation. This is UPSC's favorite, right? Especially because the NCERT writes about in depth and detail. So every year the question appears, the climatic features or the environmental feature and dominant vegetation characteristics. So often UPSC's favorite area. So read about that topic also. I'm not discussing it is because it's too basic. Another thing which is in the news, so they can connect it to the static. Coal belts, because there are news related to certain coal auctions. So coal belts again appeared in the news. So just prepare well on this coal belts and different coal belts in different parts of the country, and be little more specific, like what type of coal belts they are, means the quality of the coal they produced, and type of the mining that happens in this coal fields, and the quality of the coal they produce, and of course their geographical location. So these three things you should be very clear. One, geographical location, you should be clear. Another possibility is type of the mining site, like rat hole mining, pithead mine, like that. Other one, type of the coal, especially the quality of the coal. So these are few things you should prepare thoroughly, because this is where students generally tend to commit mistakes. Okay, then we also have framed question on one, because I would suggest you to go to the question paper, because there are some volcanoes which have erupted in the recent times, and again this is UPSC's favorite area. Regarding volcanoes, usually what they confuse is the type of the volcano, what type of volcano it is. It is a shield volcano, or is it a kind of composite volcano or stratovolcano? These are the kind of questions they generally ask. So prepare thoroughly for their location and also their characteristic features. Sometimes they may also ask whether it is an active volcano or a dormant volcano. This also they can ask questions probably. Then river system, UPSC never gets bored. But what I am probably predicting this year is they may shift this time to peninsular rivers, and probably rivers which passes through South Indian cities. Few years before they asked questions on river that passes through Coimbatore, river that passes through Chennai, like that. There is a possibility of repetition of these questions again, like rivers that passes through some South Indian cities or in the periphery of the cities. It could be, in the Deccan region, it could be Pune, or they may not ask the regular ones, but they may ask Pune, Vijayawada, smaller cities they may touch, and they may even touch smaller tributaries also, and they may ask which river or which peninsula river is flowing through this particular cities. So prepare on those lines. I would suggest you to confine yourself to South India. So South Indian rivers, peninsular rivers, and also the cities to which they are associated. If you also have time, quickly run through their source also. Source of the river, so that can give you a little more clarity. We also framed, keeping this aspect in mind, we also framed one question on river that flows to city Pune. Likewise, we framed a question. Okay. Then another favorite area of UPSC is the crops, plantation crops. They never get bored of asking questions on the plantation crops, isn't it? Every year, in some or other way, they ask questions on plantation crops because of their commercial significance, and government repeatedly say they want to double farmers' income, right? So how to double farmers' income? Yes, one way is encouraging plantation crops, and of course now the government is trying to promote agri exports, and these are all part of our diversification exercise, right? So every year we have question on plantation crops, and especially suitable climatic factors for them. Suitable climatic factors. This is how they try to connect it to geography. Okay. Sometimes they may also want to connect it to environment or ecology. They may do that. Okay, especially vis-a-vis oil palm. They try to say its negative ecological impacts somewhere else, or the possible negative ecological impacts of the plantation crops, but primarily they are asking questions on climatic factors. So prepare thoroughly on all all kind of plantation crops, and especially India's rank in exports, or India's rank in their production. So quickly run through. This is one important last minute revision topic which we should not ignore. Okay. Another static question, UPSC's favorite, because when they feel the competition is tough, when they have to somehow eliminate people, they end up asking these kind of questions. But we should be thoroughly prepared for these kind of questions, because they're a bit difficult to recall. Is the lakes location, lakes and their location, and types of the lake. Okay. When this is one, it is easy to confuse, right? Lake, location of lake, location of lake, and what type of lake? Whether it is a tectonic lake, or whether it is a crater lake, whether it is a lake formed out of a karst landforms, whether it is a lagoon, or whether it is an inland sea. These are the kind of questions they usually ask, and they may ask whether it's a freshwater lake or a brackish water lake. These are the kind of questions they ask. So at least try to identify those lakes which are in the newspapers, and try to revise them. If you have handy notes which is already mentioning all lakes at one place, that's perfectly fine. Okay. Then so one thing which again appeared in the newspapers repeatedly is, because after Operation Sindoor, there are many people who suggested aggressive military expansion in Himalayas, especially through infrastructure. And I'm sure all of you must have read in the newspapers all this massive infrastructural projects like Atal Tunnel, all these things you all must have seen. But what is silently happening is, or what is silently unfolding is a greater Himalayan disaster. Greater Himalayan disaster. If you have read newspapers carefully, you would observe that many of the springs in high altitude regions, springs becoming dry, and especially the people in the high altitude regions, they are already suffering from severe water shortages, and drought-like conditions increased, and they're becoming now, the forest fires have become now more common. Landslides and their incidence has increased. Okay, so I'm expecting one question on this Himalayan region, and especially the ecological destruction that is happening in the Himalayan region because of an increased reporting of both natural disasters and man-made disasters. Both natural disasters and man-made disasters increased. So UPSC would want a good question, will frame a good question on this topic, measures on how to address this, or issues with the existing measures, what are more nature-based solutions. These kind of questions they can probably frame for you. Okay, then one such question is one such related topic on which also we have framed a question, is thank you. Observe carefully. Hydroelectric power projects. Now, there are many new hydroelectric power projects. If you observe, starting from J&K, and also in Himachal, especially in Uttarakhand, and also in Arunachal Pradesh. Okay, these four are actually in use. In these four Himalayan states, there is a massive expansion of hydroelectric power projects because government is seeing this hydroelectric power projects as a revenue source. Okay, and government is seeing them also as a source of energy diplomacy with neighboring states. And government also for strategic reasons, you all would have read in newspapers about hydrological bomb concept of China. For all these reasons, there is an aggressive expansion of hydroelectric power projects, especially in the Himalayan region. So prepare thoroughly on this, and you also must have read in newspaper about Indus Water Treaty. Okay, so in this context, in the backdrop of geography, you find all these topics. So prepare thoroughly rather than reading random projects. Read these topics in specificity, so it could be possibly of help to you. Okay, then one area which we observed that has the possibility of appearing this year related to ancient India. Okay, because they have asked enough questions on Jainism and Buddhism. Okay, listen carefully. This year, we are predicting one question on Magadha Empire. Okay, Magadha Empire. They could possibly ask questions in Magadha Empire to probably, its pottery traditions. There is a possibility. And not just pottery traditions, probably urbanization during Magadha times, and also the metallurgy of Magadha times. See, because all this created a solid foundation for future Mauryan Empire, right? So they asked enough number of questions on Mauryan administration, Mauryan a military strategy, whatever, different topics. Magadha is one area which they have not touched upon much. Students also ignore this topic, so please don't ignore this topic. Especially read precisely about those pottery traditions, the trends of urbanization, and the type of metallurgy in Magadha. Need not study much about the political aspect of it, but the contributions, urbanization, and these kind of things we should not especially ignore. Another such area which there is also reason we framed a question on this topic, and another area we often ignore, but this time there is a possibility of question appearing is Indo-Greeks. Indo-Greeks, we tend to overread Mauryan administration and we ignore Indo-Greeks. There is a substantial contribution of Indo-Greeks also to Indian civilization, so please do not ignore that. Read about Indo-Greeks, especially Indo-Greeks is a very open-ended topic, but here we try to frame one question on, because during Indo-Greek time you must have observed that there is a gradual decline of Buddhism and Jainism, gradual decline of Buddhism, Jainism, and of course Buddhism and Jainism is almost at its peaks during the Mauryan administration, and it started to decline. And you also find the Indo-Greeks patronizing Hindu gods, especially the Bhagavata cult, worship of Vasudeva is encouraged by Indo-Greeks. So these trends UPSC did not touch upon much. So read well. There is a possibility of question appearing on this. This year another possibility is little more depth on Sangam. Okay, so we are predicting one question on Sangam society this time. Okay, Sangam society. Read on Sangam society. Okay, Sangam literature they have asked questions. Society also they have touched, but they did not go into much depth. So this time what I suggest, go into little more depth, especially the kind of the social stratification, its presence or absence during Sangam society is one possible area. Okay, another important area, this I want to highlight, please understand. The current government, especially they want to prove that there is a linkage between traditionally what we read in textbooks, NCRTCs. Somehow we find that there is no continuity, and often what we read in much more detail is about decline and eventual disappearance of Indus Valley civilization. And the current government especially believes that this is an European construct. This is an European construct, and they're trying their best through various archaeological evidences, establishing they're funding aggressively various archaeological studies, and they are trying to fund even historians. So there is an attempt to rewrite the history. I'm not saying it in a political sense, but they want to prove that there exists a continuity between Indus Valley civilization and Vedic civilization, and most of the components of Indus Valley civilization, if not all of them, or a substantial number of components of Indus Valley civilization are carried forward into Vedic civilization. So this is one favorite theme of UPSC in the last 3 to 4 years. Many students did not observe this theme. So what I am suggesting, anything which suggests this theme, anything which suggests this argument, you have to prepare in little more depth and detail. Okay, so even we framed one question to prove that the Indus Valley civilization and its extent has reached even up to South India by trying to come up with names of some sites. But what I'm more interested in teaching you is this particular aspect. Don't ignore this, because these are all recently funded studies and they are trying to establish that organic continuity between IVC and Vedic civilization. So try to search for some content or articles on that particular topic, read about them. There might be possibly a question on that. Okay, then yeah, Buddhist sites and Jainist sites and terminologies related to Buddhism, Jainism, that is one area which comes repeatedly. This time, focus more on Buddhist sites in South India. Okay, Buddhist sites in South India, especially Buddhist sites of Shatavahanas and Ikshvakus. Okay, so this time somehow I'm thinking they have asked questions of Buddhist sites in West India, Northern India, especially Eastern India and Northern India. They may ask some questions on Buddhist sites of Shatavahanas and Ikshvakus. Just prepare on that if you have not yet prepared in little more depth and detail. And Vijayanagara, like it's one repeated theme, regularly they are asking Vijayanagara, but previous year I think Vijayanagara missed out, so this time there might be a question again on Vijayanagara. Okay, another area which I think this year might possibly come is that period, 750 to 1000, often this intervening period, even in the textbooks they don't write in much depth and detail about it. So this early medieval period, other than Delhi Sultanate, we don't listen much about the early medieval period in India. Okay, so I would suggest you to read in little more depth and detail or clarity. I also framed a question on this early medieval period, especially what happened in the early medieval period with regards to commercial activity or with regards to urbanization, and how is it connected to the developments which are happening elsewhere in the city of Rome, and its impact on the trade networks. So I try to frame one such question on it, because that is one area which is not touched upon. Then regular questions like Swaraj Party, all these things I'm not again highlighting because they're all easy for you. If you have not read it, just quickly go through that part of modern Indian history. This time we are focusing on questions around non-cooperation movement and civil disobedience movement is one possibility. Okay, then tribal revolts, every year they are asking one question on tribal revolts, so try to read about tribal revolts. And here this question paper I gave only two, I could give two tribal revolts. One is Bhumi's revolt and another one Santal rebellion. I tried to give these two. Just read about other tribal revolts also. So whenever you read about these revolts, read with clarity, especially year, which year, and leaders of the moment. Who are the leaders of the moment? Then objective of the moment. Objective of the moment. Then how did this movement spread? Spread of the moment. Then impact of the moment. Impact of the moment. Then how was the movement oppressed? How it got oppressed. Then also read how it got oppressed. Then also read how, is there any contemporary legacy to it? In the contemporary times, is there any legacy, or is there anything governments have done to revive the... So whenever you read tribal movements, read it this comprehensively, so they can ask questions on any of these aspects or any of these lines. You will be in a position to easily attempt them without doing factual errors. Okay. Then another favorite area of UPSC, poets. Okay, and their literary works. poets and literary works. So this time we are thinking based on the past trends. They may ask medieval times. Medieval times, poets and their literary works. So thoroughly prepare on that. We are also predicting one question this time on paintings. Paintings would appear again this time, and probably because they have asked previously the questions on not the mainstream paintings, this time they may ask a question on especially the Mughal paintings. Okay, not what happened after the degradation of the Mughal paintings or fall of the Mughal Empire. They may ask a question, direct question on Mughal paintings itself. So painting is one possible topic this time, and especially Mughal paintings is a possible topic. So if you have not read it, if you have read it already, okay, but if you have not read it, try to read in a little more depth about this Mughal paintings. So we also have framed couple of questions on vegetation and all. Again, plantation crops only we have framed a question because we know importance of this plantation crops, and one more question on ocean currents because this time there is a possibility, high possibility of all these questions on plantation crop and commercial crop. One more area we have added is to this is it's a commercial crop again. Apple cultivation is in news this time. Apple cultivation because of the decline of the produce because of uncertain climatic conditions. You all should be aware that Apple requires at least certain numbers, 1200 to 1500 hours of chilling period. If this 1200 1500 hours of chilling period is not there, Apple quality degrades and Apple productivity degrades. Apple productivity will come down. It's in the news, so we thought there could be a possible question on that, and so we framed a question on that. So prepare for it. This is in UPSC's popular theme, okay, especially APS's popular theme, especially the kind of impact climate change or climate related disasters have. Okay, so broadly these are the areas. By this time I think you guys would have understood the intent with which we have framed the questions. So we also have framed some specific questions on environmental organizations, some environmental organizations which are in news. Only the most important ones we try to identify, and we try to frame questions on some environmental organizations. So I would suggest you to quickly go through that with the PDF as I've shared in the Telegram channel. One question on this IUCN green status of species framework is one question we framed, and another question on Global Alliance for Industry Decarbonization, and this both of them are in news. Another is Sea for All initiative. So, and also oil and gas decarbonization charter. Okay, so quickly follow these 4 topics if you have not read it. I'll read out quickly. So green status framework, that is one thing, and also one question on Global Alliance for Industry Decarbonization, and another question on Sea for All initiative, and another question on oil and gas decarbonization chapter. In AKS IAS Telegram channel you will find these questions. Okay, so like every year they ask questions on materials, right? Environmental materials. So also questions on environmental materials are important. This year one material which is very much in news is polylactic acid and bioplastics. So read about this polylactic acids because it is often projected as a green alternative. Bioplastics are projected as green alternatives. So read about these green alternatives. And one such question is which is in news again is the topic of press mud. So read about this press mud also, which is a byproduct of sugarcane industry and how it could be of possible help. So what I'll try to do is I have taken this session to impress upon you that there is a lot of relevance to the questions we have framed, and we have applied what do you call, some little bit of research we have done to identify the questions. So quickly go to the Telegram channel and try to download this particular PDF and run through these questions very fast, and also model answers also I'll be sharing by evening, so you will get a sense of the possible important topics. The questions have been framed deliberately a bit difficult because we want them to be educative in nature. So don't worry, even if you have scored less in this paper, that's perfectly fine. So yeah, that's it, and yeah, all the very best, and we will be launching a solid mains initiative soon after the completion of this prelims test. And our mains initiative is going to be, what do you call, very comprehensive and with a solid and detailed evaluation. Okay, more details about it I'll be providing very soon in the YouTube. Thank you, all the very best.
Sir, బంద్ చేస్తూ సార్